What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new video on my channel. But before we get all into the topic, I would like for you all to do a few things. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the share button so you're sharing this with your friends. Hit the like button. Make sure you're hitting the bell icon so that you get all the notifications you need for whenever I post a new video. And also feel free to leave me a comment below. That way I can kind of see the things that you have to say after you watch the entire video. So for today's topic, I want to talk about my main issue with race swapping characters from white to black in movies, TV shows, comics, etc. I think the main issue with this topic, without even thinking about the very obvious aspects of it, is that people typically don't talk about this at the highest possible level, and that's what I'm going to do today. I made a term on social media, specifically Instagram, where I talked about the race swapping trope being an extension of something much bigger. And I would call this trope the black carbon copy trope. The basic definition of this is the concept of a creator taking a character that is white or another race, specifically white, we're talking about in this instance, and turning them into a black character when they already have origins as a white character. Now, this looks differently depending on if we're talking about race swapping or this other ideal that I would call mantle passing. So let's go through those two things. Specifically, let's start with mantle passing. That way people kind of know the difference. Mantle passing is when you change a character who has an origin that, the character is white and they have a certain story. And then you change all of those things up, but keep the husk of the character the same. So an example of this would be a character like Miles Morales. So in other words, they have a Spider-Man character, Peter Parker, who's white, that everybody knows and is the most popularized character. And then they turned him into a black character in Miles Morales. So in other words, not only did they just change the name, they also changed the look, they changed the backstory, they changed all these other things about him so that he fits this black narrative, although that's an issue for another day. I won't go into Miles Morales and my issues with him right now, but I'm just saying that they changed the husk. They changed the character without changing the husk of where he came from. So in other words, he still wears a spider suit. He still has Spider-Man powers. The concept of how he became Spider-Man, there's still some similarities there. Now, a race swap is different, and it's a lot more basic and generic. It's basically taking a character that was white and just turning them black and all the features that are associated. So in other words, you don't really change their name. You don't change much of their backstory. You don't change much about their origins or anything like that. You're just simply taking a character that was originally white and then making them black, and that's pretty much it. So one is just a little bit more nuanced than the other is basically what I'm getting at, but they are very different. So now that I've explained that, let's talk about race swapping and why it's an issue. Race swapping is an issue, first of all, because it is prime tokenism. The main problem with this is that a lot of times when characters are race swapped, there's no originality with it. It's just the idea of a white creator or a white producer trying to meet a diversity checkbox by saying, you know what, we have diversity, we have black characters, but we didn't really put any thought into it. And really, to be honest, it's actually on purpose that they do this. They do this because, again, they're trying to meet a diversity checkbox and they're trying to appeal to an audience of people who claim to be justice oriented. And they don't want to lose any revenue or fans because of the fact that they may not portray this quote unquote diversity that people love to see. So what they did was they portrayed a lot of black characters that used to be white in order to pacify that audience, specifically black audiences who may also revolt if they're not pacified by seeing images of themselves, even if that image of themselves was that of what was originally a white character that was turned into a black character at some point. So that's one issue that I have with it. Another issue that I have with race swapping is that in a lot of these instances, it's an issue of taking a character that had been scalped from black origins to a certain extent and then was made into a white character. So this character had already been repackaged, but the way that they are presented to their audiences is as if they're the original, although even elements of that character were based off of something that was related to black people, to then turn around and only turn them black again. So to me, that's also an issue as well too. An example of this, a really good example of this would be like the character Superman. If you look at Superman, he was a white male, right? But if you look at the origins of Superman, there's a lot of things that relate to blackness to some extent. So let's kind of go into those different things. He has a Hebrew name as in Kal-El, so that's one thing to consider. The second thing is that the origin of the story was based off of the black American track star Jesse Owens, and how he basically had went to the Olympics, and he had done these incredible feats even to the point of defeating the Germans, so he's also seen as somewhat of a hero. You also had this issue where the Clark Kent character is a Kryptonian who has a sun god on his planet who was called Rao, or Rao, I hope I said that correctly, and there actually is an Egyptian god whose name is Ra. So it also could have been suggested that it was scalped from that as well too. And then you also have the symbol on his chest, which is an S, and it's inside of a diamond, but really what that looks like is a pyramid upside down with a snake in the middle of it. You can go on and on, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are multiple instances that we can suspect where this has been scalped from black culture and turned into some type of white character. And then they went ahead and then I'm going to say mantle passed in this case, because they did change the origins. They mantle passed the Superman character, which was originally Clark Kent Kal-El, and they turned him into Calvin Ellis in the comics. So that's an example of what I mean by that. So that may be more so mantle passing, but it's still important to say. Also with race swapping, you also got Ariel, who in the Disney story, in the recent Disney story that came out, this is a good example of race swapping itself. But basically, she was originally a white character, but if you look at the origin of a lot of mermaids, you have a lot of these water goddesses that were in African cultures, such as Yamaya and Mama Wata, and these different like African goddesses and African figures in their mythology who also had origins or this understanding that they actually were mermaids as well. And Ariel was taken from that concept originally. Now, Ariel was then turned into a black character in the Halle Bailey version that we've seen in the very recent movie. So it's like, once again, they scalped black culture in the very beginning to even create the Ariel character, only for this character to turn around and then be black again when Disney made this movie. So there's other examples out there. I just gave you two. I gave you one for mantle passing, one for race swapping. But the point that I'm trying to make is that they race swapped this character when there already were origins that this character had some form of blackness or something from black culture in the first place. When it comes to race swapping the character from white to black, another issue that I have that a lot of people aren't pointing out is that a lot of this creates what I would call a playing both sides narrative. So let me explain what I mean by that. Most of the time when these different producers who create TV shows and movies and all these other things, when they create these different pieces of lore, what they do is they take a character that they know was white or was just not black at all to begin with, and they turn them black, knowing that to some extent it's going to incite all of these racist white nerds, you know, the ones that come on my channel and just spew a bunch of BS all the time because they're mad that I'm talking about race. A lot of them will come on and they'll revolt and be upset and be mad and angry at the fact that there is a black character or the presence of a black character. So much that what they do is they actually blame black people for the reason why that became a thing. And I'll get into that. That's another reason why I don't like the race swapping thing, but I'll get into that in a minute. So they know that these people are going to get mad, right? But what they also do themselves is they capitalize on that. So you'll have these white producers and creators and people like that show support or so-called support and solidarity with these black characters who were casted into these roles that were originally for a white character. So now they're playing both sides because they're playing oppressor while also playing someone who's supposed to be a supporter at the same time. Now, you're probably looking at me and saying, oh, that's just different white people doing different things. But here's the problem. They're all working together to a certain extent. You have the white supremacists who are castigating black people, which is one thing that white supremacists do. And then you have the ones that are capitalizing on this opportunity by saying, hey, if we portray a black character, if we portray diversity in some way, we can profit off of this thing that we decided that we were going to portray. So the reason why it's an issue is because they're profiting off of black people at the expense of putting them out there so that they can experience racism and all these other things, while also making themselves look good because they're defending the people who they put out there in the first place, just so they can make money and just so that they can make profits. Another issue with the race swapping of the characters thing is that black people do get blamed for it and we have absolutely nothing to do with it. The problem with the race swapping thing is that people aren't looking at things at the highest level, which is something I've said over and over and over again. We're not looking at things at the highest level. We're looking at things that are right in front of our faces. When it comes to these characters that are race swapped into black characters, you have to look at who is the person who's in control, who are the producers, who are the creators, who are the people who run the show. If you look at pretty much every production studio, everything that's cinematic, whatever the case may be, notice that they're either a white person is controlling it, they're controlling the narrative completely, or they have some type of influence. And what I mean by some type of influence, they're alongside someone black. Even if it's something that is just supposed to be meant for black people exclusively, there's always some white person who's there in the mix who is producing these things and creating these things. And it's very rare that you find a black person who's creating this type of animated content and things like that, where they're producing this all by themselves, all by their lonesome. You really don't see that for real. So most of the time when they're blaming black people for taking white characters, like old girl from Fast and Furious, like the actress, I can't think of her name right now, but Michelle Rodriguez, that's her name. Michelle Rodriguez talking all that crap about how we're stealing all the white people superheroes, which was already some racist stuff, and I won't get into that today. But the point that I'm trying to make is that how can we steal something that we're not creating or producing? There's no way for us to do that. So we're getting blamed actually for the race swap thing, as if we're individuals who cannot be self-sufficient and cannot create our own things, while also at the same time ignoring all the factors that have eliminated black people from being able to be self-sufficient. Because I look at this as a thing where you're really making a bootstraps comment, and I'm looking back at that and I'm saying, well, if it's all about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, then what happened with Tulsa? What happened with all the other black Wall Streets that white people had destroyed? All of a sudden, we're not pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Those were just random events that occurred. You know how they like to say those are riots when they're really massacres? That type of thing. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, this is crazy. You're sitting there blaming us for something that your own people, white people, actually created. So really, we're not race swapping ourselves, like absorbing ourselves into these white characters and saying, here we are. They're literally taking the white characters and creating them into black ones for the sakes of diversity so they can make profits off of it. So it's just silly to even make that argument in the first place. So the reality and the issue with all of this race swapping stuff that people like to do is that we really need to have some type of focus as black people in, one, divesting from white society and the narratives that they try to create and the agendas that they try to create. So that's one thing. And number two, we have to stop begging for representation or to be represented properly, because at the end of the day, what a lot of these white folks are going to do when they create this content is they're just going to take these white characters and they're just going to make them black, like a simple cut and paste or copy and paste. And then they just change up the color of the skin. And that's pretty much it. All right, y'all. So that was my take on that topic. I hope y'all enjoyed what I had to say. I'm probably going to have a lot more to say on this topic. I try to cover it enough in the short amount of time that I'm doing this video. But if you like this video and you want to hear more, feel free to, again, like this, subscribe, hit the notifications, leave me a comment, and do whatever you got to do. Anyway, y'all, I hope y'all have a good rest of y'all's day, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.